Hello, my name is Julia, and today we will have a presentation about the cost principle. We will cover the following topics: why cost principle matters, the cost principle as a cognitive anchor, loss aversion and accounting decisions, and lastly, the conclusion as well as the references. Let's start off with the research question that is going to guide us throughout the whole presentation. So, how does the cost principle, while improving reliability in financial reporting, systematically influence judgment and decision making through behavioral biases? Let's have a look why the cost principle really matters. The cost principle is one of the most fundamental valuation rules in financial accounting. It improves reliability by recording asset at the original transaction price. Another name for cost principle is also the historical cost. This approach is favored because it is objective, verifiable, and less subject to managerial discretion. From a financial reporting perspective, this improves reliability and comparability. However, behavioral research suggests that accounting numbers do not only inform decisions, they also influence judgment. This invites critical examination of whether reliable accounting information may, nevertheless, lead to biased decision making. Behavioral accounting research confirms that accounting numbers systematically influence judgment. This creates a trade off between reliability and behavioral distortion. For understanding it better, let's have a look at the example. This example shows how an asset purchase for 10,000 euros remains recorded at the amount even if its market value changes over time. Although it improves consistency, users often focus on the original cost, even when it no longer reflects the current economic value. Despite changing economic reality, the original value remains cognitive silent, which means the original value stays in our mind. Let's check the cost principle as a cognitive anchor. According to behavioral decision theory, individuals rely on anchors when making judgments under uncertainty, and that those first numbers influence later judgments. In accounting, historical cost often becomes such a reference point. Even when new information is available, this original value continues to influence judgment over time. Tversky and Kahneman show that people rely strongly on initial numbers when making later judgment. They say different starting points yield different estimates, which are biased toward the initial values. In accounting, historical cost values can act as such anchors, shaping how investors, managers, or auditors assess performance and value. Let's have a look at the loss aversion and accounting decisions. In addition to anchoring, prospect theory suggests that individuals are loss averse. Behavioral research shows that people tend to fear losses more than they value equivalent gains. In a managerial context, this can lead some managers to avoid taking a debt, even when it could benefit the company. The potential downside is perceived as more painful than the expected gains, which means losses weigh heavier than gains in decision making. Historical cost often serves as a psychological benchmark. Once an asset is recorded as a certain value, decision makers tend to evaluate changes relative to that benchmark. As a result, they may delay impairments or resist downward revisions, which can influence judgment and reporting behavior. Linking back to the research question, this shows that the cost principle has a dual effect. On the one side, it improves reliability by grounding values in objective transactions. On the other hand, behavioral biases such as anchoring and loss aversion cause historical cost figures to systematically influence judgment, even when they are economically outdated. So, concluding, one could say that the cost principle is therefore not problematic per se. Its strength lies in reliability and verifiability. However, behavioral research highlights the need for critical interpretation of cost based figures, especially in decision making context. Understanding these behavioral effects is essential for critically interpreting cost based financial statements. This illustrates that accounting principles do not merely measure reality, but also shape how economic reality is perceived and evaluated. Finally, the behavioral effect on the cost principle also links to other accounting topics discussed in this course. Historical cost can contribute to hidden reserves, influence the recognition of goodwill, and affect how volatility is perceived in financial statements. Thank you for your attention, and here you can check the references that I've used.